Welcome back to Press Pass. We change focus now to a story that broke and went viral, of course, on social media. And this is the allegations of harassment and even rape of patients, new mothers at the KNH National Hospital. And hundreds of women are demanding action from the President and Inspector General of Police over the alleged cases of rape at the KNH. And under the umbrella Center for Rights, Education and Awareness, demonstrators took to the streets of Nairobi to express what they refer to as the slow process of investigations on this particular matter. We know there's another protest that will be held tomorrow on the same issue. And here's a package that was put together by Daniel Mule on the very latest.
The demonstrators started their march at Uhuru Park into Nairobi's Central Business District, then to Harambee Avenue, where they presented their petition to the office of the President. They then proceeded to the office of the Inspector General of Police, Joseph Boynet, at Jogoo House, where they delivered a 12-point petition. The police spokesperson Charles Owino received the petition on behalf of Boynet, giving an assurance to the petitioners that the Inspector General is aware of the seriousness of the matter and that he is in touch with a special team already set aside to investigate the matter.
The Kenyatta National Hospital is an institution in a position of authority and trust, and therefore owes a duty of care to its patients. It therefore follows that the administration should have in place systems and structures that protect vulnerable patients and that responds expeditiously to any acts or omission that breach that duty of care.
We, as concerned citizens, are also ready to take any and all civil action that is available in law to ensure that the rights of vulnerable mothers at the Kenyatta National Hospital are not infringed, and that the hospital administration discharges its duties of care and, where necessary, held liable for general and exemplary damages for any such alleged acts of sexual violence.
Tusaidie si kuleta petition peke yake, lakini pia kusensitize na kuzungumza na wamama wajue kwamba ukibakwa unapeana report immediately.
Other groups of activists and human rights crusaders will be holding similar demonstrations tomorrow in condemnation of the rape allegations at KNH. The group says the presentation of their petition is not the end and that they will be watching, and if no action is taken within 2 weeks, they will be announcing their next course of action. Daniel Mule, NTV.
And we certainly welcome your views as you follow this conversation. And the first thing I'd want to know is whether, in your view, I'll start with Dolphin, this is a case of mainstream media catching up or playing catch up with social media on this particular issue.
I think it kind of is, because the story broke through social media when someone posted their experience or what they said was their experience at KNH. In 2013, 5 years ago, there was a story that was actually put out through media on a rape allegation on a patient at KNH. And KNH handled it in such a way that people felt at the time that they were doing the due diligence. The male attendant who was accused was suspended, the case was taken to the police and everything. Why I think media is playing catch up now is that that was kind of the first public allegation that came on about rape from KNH. Good journalism would have been that that story would not have died then, because 5 years later, I'm not sure, maybe someone else is. We're not sure where this story ended. So it went to police, there was investigation, then what? What happened after that? Because I think if we stayed on the ball back then maybe now we'd not be having the allegations that we have right now. I don't know what the allegations are, if they're true or not, and I cannot imagine anyone making such stories up, because rape is such a private crime that no one wants to kind of have the tag that they've been raped unless they've actually really been raped. And to have a couple of people coming out and saying that they went through this, then maybe this is something that people should pay more attention to rather than say, you know, we've not received reports. So I think when I think of media playing catch up, I think if they'd stayed on the game back then would not be, maybe we would not be where we are right now. Right. Because we have a history of kind of forgetting things. We report, and like Dorothy said, knee-jerk reactions, react to a situation and move on to other things, other more, you know, fancy things that are happening around us at the time. So we're kind of chasing social media. if we had stayed on the story back then, maybe there would be more solutions that would have been put in place at KNH by now. Because back then, KNH did actually accept or agree to the fact that they found the male attendant guilty or suspected that what had happened had actually happened. So that is the time that the media could have stayed on the story and made sure that something was actually done in terms of ensuring that there's proper security and not waiting until something else happens. My worry is that with the hype in social media dying down, tomorrow there's this demonstration going to happen. When the hype dies down, we'll move on to other things.
Right.
Yeah.
And Dorothy, do you think another element of this, because we'll continue with that, sustaining this particular story to the certain end of justice being met out for the perpetrator, and of course some help for those who are victims when it is proved so. And Dorothy, has the mainstream media lost the trust of the people, of the citizenry? Because we're not the first person to come to. Well, they will come to us. They'll report certain issues to us. But it seems like it's a preferable avenue to post it on social media than get the attention of the nation or even the people who run these institutions.
I would look at it a bit differently. That the social media has that immediacy. And really, we can only expect to get more news breaking through the social media and then taking it upon ourselves to follow up in depth. Because unlike the mainstream media, the social media lacks that depth. So rather than beating ourselves and thinking how hopeless the mainstream media is, we should look at it that, okay, this has broken out on the social media. Now, let's delve into it. And it should not be a cause for guilt that we are playing catch up with the social media. It should just be like somebody would have called to say, hey, do you know this is happening? You know?
Right. Can we say, as a project director of Internews, that we now, at the age of actually using and adding social media to a source of information,
yes,
as a news source,
yes,
in and of itself, credible enough?
It is a news source. But then again, I'm sorry, I want to throw a spanner in the works. As much as we talk about the immediacy that comes with social media, let's also look at the trust. Just like you said, have the public also lost trust with the media? Because before, yes, we did have Facebook. Didn't just come the other day. Twitter didn't just come the other day. What we have right now is so many stories that are pointed out. We have anonymous sources that usually send us stories. Unfortunately for us, we have to go through a very long verification process at the newsroom level. You have so many questions that have to be answered to your editor before you're even allowed to go follow up on that story. However, when it comes to social media, we have citizen watchdogs who are literally flagging these stories, putting them out on social media, and then after that there's a reaction, and then we play catch up. So we also need to look at our system as journalists. So some of these incidences are coming to us, they're coming to our newsrooms, but before it becomes something that you can follow up on, you find that your editor will have piled so much stuff on you and overlook that particular story. So by the time you decide you're going to do that story, it's already been overtaken by events. Again, in comes the issue of trust in terms of us being able to run stories. How many stories have we gotten that we are burying? Because a powerful person will call us and tell us, bury that particular story. So I look at it twofold. Yes, there's a system that we have to follow as journalists, but then again, there's also how porous we have become in our profession.
Also very cautious because there's a threat of legal action. Perhaps
exactly.
If you go with the report and it is not
confirmed
true.
It's not verified.
Yes, verified
yes.
yet. Then an institution would say, you know, there's libel there and whatnot. So we've been very cautious. But perhaps then the angle of using or approaching a story from a social media aspect, that it's first reported on social media, then is a safe way that we approach it and ride with it. I don't know, how did you first get this particular story?
Well, for me, I got a phone call from my sister who was in India, and she sent me a picture very early in the morning and asked me, have you seen this? Because it disturbed her. She is now, a mother. And I looked at it and I said, no, I haven't seen this, but it's quite interesting. So before coming to work, I already was interested in finding out more.
And these are screenshots of
this is just one screenshot. Then she sent me more screenshots. And I was a bit thrown back, like, wow, this is serious. You're seeing a lot of people now talking, and you're finding someone who's referring to an incident in 2013. And I'm thinking, has this really been happening? Well, we know so many stories about KNH. I mean, it's a total mess, without a doubt. But this particular one, going on for this length of time, I mean, it was serious. And then I went out to actually now go for the whistleblower, and I contacted her, and we spoke on phone, and I told her I would want to speak to the person who gave you this story. But then at the time, the source was scared because everybody was trying to reach her. And she's a mother, she's there at KNH for the next few weeks or months. And obviously you have to approach this with a lot of care because you have to protect her identity. She's obviously a new mother, very scared of what has happened. But as journalists, you know, it's very easy for us to run to get those very horrific stories and do interviews. I mean, we just want the story out. But writing, like you're saying, over social media, you know, Facebook is, you know, suddenly becoming the fastest growing virtual city full of sources of all kinds with updates and all that. But people always forget that mainstream media is also on social media. So it's a very thin line. You just can't divide the mainstream media. When I was in school, I remember my first lecture was, which are the sources of news? Where do you get news? And I remember then we never used to have Facebook. There was no Instagram or Twitter. There was no social media. Right. And back then, your news sources were official publications, official records. These are witnesses of an incident or crime and so on and so forth. And I remember Mr. Kamau who said that, you know, you can also go to a brothel, get news. You can also go talk to street kids, the watchmen, get news. And the people on social media are just ordinary people. These are people working in offices, so they become sources of news. So instead of now going to the street is actually on Facebook. So there's nothing wrong with getting news from social media. And it's not that they're the first ones to break news. Well, they break, but like Dorothy said, they lack depth. And also there are certain things that also need verification. And this is where now a media house will verify these facts. And sometimes it's painful to verify these facts because you have to get a news source, you have to get a name, you have to get a story, you have to get someone to talk to you. And so it takes time, but by the time you go on air with this, you're very confident of what you're putting on air.
But there's something you said, Dennis, and not to put you on the spot because it's a challenge that faces everyone in the profession. You say, when you're telling the story of, you know, it's been bad at KNH and we all know this, then perhaps we've been sleeping on the job if we know that things have been bad and not having taken any action.
I will admit, there is, in media, there is what I call fatigue. We've done stories about KNH. I've done several stories on KNH. I will admit to some degree, we tend to relax. And the reason why we relax is because we get overwhelmed by the number of stories that are coming out every day. Today you're dealing KNH. Tomorrow there's another scandal. So you're trying to balance this story, go for the new scandal. By the time you realize 30th, there's a protest happening in Uhuru Park. And, you know, you would wish we had, you know, many media houses or many journalists who will eventually cover many of these stories, bring them up. But to be truthful, we can't do everything all at the same time. Sometimes you suffer fatigue, and this happens in the newsroom where you follow a story about KNH. I mean, Dolphin mentioned a case, and I totally agree with her that we should have stayed on with that case. But there's always, you take a direction with a new story. Then to some point when the authorities take it over, we tend to relax a bit. We need to keep the momentum, but other stories keep coming up. Like this one happened when I was planning to go on a trip to go do another investigative story. So again, you have to balance. Can I stop this so that I can start pursuing this? By the time I'm in the middle of pursuing this and something else comes up. Right. So it's a balancing act, and it's not easy for journalists.
And Mark, just to add to what Dennis has said, you guys have mentioned the issue of sources. And this KNH story, just like you've rightfully put it, is not a new story. I have a sister who works at KNH, somebody who's literally come out and said it is very insecure. She's felt threatened there before. If they are on night shifts, they have to literally be accompanied by somebody else for them to do the rounds within the hospital. That's my own sister. I am a journalist. So if I tell my sister today, come out and tell your story, she will refuse because one, her job will be threatened. Two, she doesn't not know the repercussion of her telling that particular story. So there's also the fear on her, and this is a staff member. So if a staff member feels threatened, what about a mere patient?
Right. And
I just wanted to add, I think Dennis brings up the issue of fatigue, and I think this comes because when you're doing investigative stories, it takes longer than going to an event and reporting on, a press conference or, a rally or something like that. An investigative story takes a lot of kind of emotional immersion into the story for you to get what you really need to get from it. But also other resources, financial resources. So maybe what we should be talking about is media houses investing in investigative stories so that people can actually go and do these stories, take time and do these stories so that when you're on a story, you actually get to do it and complete it. Instead of giving hints, so that you produce stories where you give hints that this may have happened and it's not conclusive, and then people are left to figure it out on their own whether this really happened or didn't happen, because it's not just the the problem with the journalist doing the story, it's also how much support are you getting to do this story, because you need support to do this story, because these kind of stories take not only time but other resources. How much investment is provided by media houses to journalists so that they can actually go and do in-depth stories, for example. They are hard to do, and this means then you need much more than just one journalist following up the same story. The whole newsroom should be invested, or at least a whole department should be available to pursue this.
But this is not always a reality that we'd have a dedicated department, Dorothy.
Actually, it needs to be clarified that what Dolphin is calling fatigue can be looked at in two ways. One is just the physical fatigue of the journalist pursuing the matter. But the more important fatigue is at the editorial level, where your editor feels, so what is new? And then that is like a put-off, So it's very difficult to sustain the momentum because, yes, what will be new? What will you be saying that will keep people riveted to that story, So we are really looking at two types of fatigue.
She's pointed out something interesting. What people don't notice is in news operations, in the newsroom, you have a running order of the news stories at 7 p.m. or at 9 p.m. Then there are priorities to stories. So you'll find today KNH is the big story today, is story number one. It's at the top there. Then there's a follow-up story about people, coming out and talking about what they've experienced. It may not be the same case tomorrow. So tomorrow something else happens, and then it drops from being the top story to story number 2. By end of the week, it drops to story number 4 or 5. Now, within the clock, 1 hour, how many stories can you run? So like she's saying, at some level, there's also fatigue at the editorial level where you think, what is new about this story? So the investigators have taken it up. The people are going to be arraigned in court. So what else? So people feel they're almost tired. They want to know other things that are happening around the country. Then something happens. There's a story about MCAs. Then it becomes the big story. And again, there's something Sammy mentioned before we came on air. The headlines are about sensation. You want to sell the biggest headline. So KNH may be the biggest headline today, but will it be the same case on 30th when we have protests in town? Chances are it may not. It may fall into the middle pages of the paper. So again, we are a reflection of Kenyans out there. We're not any different. Journalists are basically ordinary people like everybody else out there. So the same way people consume news is the same way we produce news. Right. Apart from the victims who will always feel they need justice and they need you to keep the conversation going. Right. But there are other things that are happening, and it's just so much. Like I said, it requires a balancing act.
So we'll ask, and I'll hold you on that point because I have to take another break. This is the last break, and then we get to the concluding part of this conversation, where perhaps we could talk about, is there a logical end to this particular story, and what will it be? What will determine that we have pursued it to its logical end, if there is something like that? Nyagaka Nyakundi, as he follows the conversation, one of many who've written in, the media covered the KNH story with a measure of laziness, relying on accounts by perceived victims in a shady Facebook group. That is buyers beware. I believe that's what you're attributing to. They did not see any quote. I did not see any quote attributed to a real victim, even anonymously. Something else we'll get into as we pursue this story moving forward. We'll be back shortly. to a last part of Press Pass, and just to look at quick views that you're sending in. Jeremiah Karaoke says the media at times tends to take a shortcut in a sensational way to get headlines. This often may hinder the investigative aspect, and you cite one post by Citizen TV. This was, I believe, sometime back. Can't get the date here, but it says KNH rape investigation hits dead end as complainants fail to record statements with police, and you're citing the program that was on Monday. And yes, there is that issue of people speaking and coming out. Yes, I mentioned Nyagaka Nyakundi, who said the media covered the KNH story with a measure of laziness, relying on accounts by perceived victims in a shady Facebook group, and I did not see any quote attributed to the real victim. And I can take one example here. This is a story by Wamboi Bodhia from the Standard newspaper. Kenyatta National Hospital CEO angers Kenyans after responding to rape allegations. And if you see the way it was told, at least then, it showed the reactions of people online, and it captured some of the accounts that were posted on the group that is cited there, the Facebook group, and perhaps this is what Nyagaka Nyakundi says. But again, we get back to the point where even something like buyers beware is credible in terms of if it's verified information, it is worth looking into and not ignoring.
Well, truth of the matter is you cannot ignore these issues. And at the end of the day, for us as journalists, the most unfortunate thing is we cannot just carry a story without literally being sure that it is true. Because, again, we are governed by a code of ethics that is at the Media Council. And in case we say something that later comes back and it is seen as not truth, then we are liable. We will be taken to court, and we will be prosecuted, and we will pay heavy fines. In some instances, these fines will not be paid by your media house. They will be paid by the reporter who actually reported that particular story. So that's why sometimes we have to be very, very careful. But in terms of picking up stories on social media, let's be honest, in this time and age, we're seeing so much stuff on social media fast before it hits mainstream media. And we can even talk about what we started with, which is the muggings, like what happened on Kimathi Street the other day. The first time it broke was on social media when the CCTV footage was doing all the rounds before the media picked it up. But then here we are talking about something that we can literally see, there's evidence, this actually happened. So when you actually talk about it, you have the proof that it did happen. So we cannot dismiss what is on social media. But then again, unfortunately for us, sometimes we cannot carry that as gospel truth.
In this aspect, what are our options of verifying these allegations?
I think because we all know that the essence of journalism is verification. Like Mariah says, we cannot just run with a story. What the media has done with this story, for example, I think there's been a bit of fair coverage. For example, they've gone to KNH, to the press conference, and given KNH a right of reply to their allegations. They've tried to follow up with some of the people who've made these allegations. Anonymously, I've seen some clips with people giving their own personal accounts at KNH. So I think the media is trying. I think where the gaps are is in kind of taking advantage of this situation right now to take the story just out of this event and make it bigger than this event, because I think if we look at the country as a whole, the rape culture, we have a rape culture, we have to admit that. From KDH's Kenya Demographic Health Survey 2014, 14% of the women surveyed have experienced sexual violence. That is 1 in 7. So maybe this is the time to talk about this and bring this into reports. So it's not only, if it's happening at KNH, it's not only at KNH. And because people are agitated right now, then it means this is the time to have this conversation. And this is where media now expands this out of just KNH. So KNH is the event, but what is a big story in Kenya right now? So this is where we expand out of this space and talk about just the rape culture. Why, for example, the CEO at KNH says, why haven't we gotten reports of this sexual violence? Why haven't we gotten any reports? So we have to examine this and ask the same question. Why? Because we have to understand that rape is a very private crime. Many people are ashamed when they experience this crime. So the nature of rape itself most of the time, victims will not want to come out because they think they are part of the reason why they were raped. So we have to talk about this, the rape culture that facilitates, that enables for this to happen. I've seen people covering KNH proposing to KNH that the wards are moved closer to each other. Is this really the issue, that the wards are far from each other? Because if there's a rapist at KNH, they're going to find a way to do it, whether the wards are next to each other or not. So the issue is not that the fact, well, this will help, of course, with other things, for example, with helping women who are, you know, in a physical state that they cannot support themselves. They've just had CS, they've just had a baby, they are physically weak. Having them close to the wards where the children are is going to help that situation. But this is not going to address the issue of rape, which is what we're talking about right now. Because this is about a person committing a crime. So how do we solve that? And this is a conversation that the media should be helping the Kenyan community to have right now. Not just about where is the ward, because that is not why the rape is happening. The rape is happening if it's happening because there is a rapist in the vicinity. And these are the questions you should be asking KNH. What are they doing about this? Not about the space, not about lighting, because, I mean, people walk in the dark all the time. Do they always get raped? No. There has to be a rapist around for rape to happen. Right. So the media should be addressing kind of the bigger picture questions, issues that are coming out of this. Now, especially now that people are agitated and people, this is the right frame of mind for people to talk about this. What are our issues around rape? How do we address them globally so that it's not just something happened at KNH, because it can happen anywhere. Yeah. There's
a bigger story, but perhaps right now the pressure is give us the answers to certain subjects of this story that we want to hear, and that is the victim. We want to hear from the victim, and that is the villain who is responsible. We want someone seen to be shown that this is actually, if it's a mortician who is on duty at this particular time and there's a confession, we want them on record, and if it's a confession, all good. But if it's someone saying, this is a mortician who actually harassed me in this way or another, and we want the authorities, that is perhaps even the CEO of KNH, to be brought to actually take responsibility for what is happening under her roof at the KNH. That's the pressure we have right now to get those answers right now.
I was thinking that in a civilized country, Madam Lily Ross should have resigned, because this is extremely serious, you know. And I'm saying so because I do know that corporates and our hospitals are now more or less corporate entities, are very good at protecting their own. So while we are focusing on morticians, it's on record that even doctors do these things to their patients, you know. They exploit the confidence, you know, that the patients have in them. And because he's your doctor, there's a hush-hush about it. Because which hospital wants to say that our doctors are raping patients, you know? And even when they approach those patients, because perhaps the patient has had the guts to say that this happened to me, you know, who gets to know what they said or the means they used to discipline? You know, just sex is a very private area, as Dolphin says, and this story could be a lot bigger than we are imagining. And so there's just that matter that there could also be staff beyond the lowly morticians, because morticians, you know, they have been also known or said to rape incoming corpses, you know. If you come in and you are still warm, they do it. And this is in the public domain. So let's go beyond that lowly cadre and just look at what is happening. Remember also that Madam Koros was, at first she seemed very skeptical, you know. It was like, maybe, but I doubt. And then later she comes, so I didn't deny, you know, when the heat got too high, when the temperature got too hot, you know. So does she know more than we know, you know? What exactly is going on at KNH? and as Dolphin said, around the country.
Okay, and now we're getting to the concluding remarks here, and want us to think of the logical end in your perspective, or where we should perhaps focus on at the point that we're at. Dolphin has mentioned that there's a bigger story right now, and should take advantage of this opportunity and this time to discuss the bigger story, that is a rape culture that has been in the country and that needs to be addressed. But still, the pressure is on you as an investigative editor to get to that victim who will confess and tell us. Perhaps someone else would be content when they hear that the CEO, Lily Koros, has resigned. Perhaps someone will be content when they see someone in court and given a sentence. Maybe it's a mortician or someone, a staff member, whoever is responsible. But we can't get away with just saying there are reports of doctors raping, because the doctors, this is a respectable profession. Not all of them are bad. So how do we get to that? Where did you stop in your pursuit of this particular story?
You know, before I even answer that, I wanted to know from my sisters in India, like I mentioned earlier, how did India deal with this? Because there was a time when India had so many cases of rape in public service buses, on streets, in government buildings. It was crazy. And I asked her, so we are now dealing with this, and she was concerned, and I asked, so how did they deal with this? And she mentioned that in hospitals and in government buildings, you'll find in every lift, there's a security officer there, 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So they're protecting women. They're making sure where women will feel vulnerable in enclosed spaces, there's protection there. And I took that as a cue. Now, the approach to a story like this one, this is not a secret. My approach is always very simple to these kind of stories, because it's easy to break the story, but then after a while, we take out the victims out of the story, and then the story takes a different direction. And this is where I'm talking about when politicians now get involved. And we've seen many people streaming to Kenyatta National Hospitals like they've never known this has been going on. And this is for optics, basically. They know the cameras are going there. They know the journalists are going to interview them. So it's easy for anyone to walk in there as a politician. You know, you're sympathizing with the mothers there. You're holding their babies. You're trying to soothe them. You're trying to speak to the mothers. Yet this has always been happening. We have done stories. We may not have done the best, but we've done this kind of stories. But in this particular incident, there are 4 things here. And these are the 4 key things in most of these stories, by the way. There is always the angle of politics, and then there's special interests, and then you look in persons of interest, and then you look in finally at the truth. In KNH case, you're talking about politics. This is where there have been conversations that how comes this has happened at a time when the president has not announced the second part of the cabinet? What is going on, the CS of health and so on and so forth. There's politics around that. Who is pushing this button? And then there's also the issue now of politicians taking advantage of going out there for publicity purposes to look like they're sympathizing with the victims and so on and so forth, and the opposition and all that. That's the politics. The special interest is there's also another story where could this have been allowed to happen because KNH wants donor funding, or the government wants donor funding? I mean, there are all these arguments, trust me, they're all out there. Persons of interest, you're looking at the CEO, like Dorothy mentioned, and the management of KNH. This is not the first time we are seeing the management of KNH under pressure. Mm-hmm. We've seen others before under pressure. We've seen people being told to go home because you're not taking control and taking charge of a situation. Right. In this case, it's this current CEO. The natural way of dealing with this is obviously to be skeptical about it, somewhat deny, then come out later and say we're investigating. Today, I met a gentleman who told me the sister was there, admitted there, and he took an opportunity to go around just asking different people, have you seen investigators? Have you seen people asking questions? And he was told, no, there is no one actually doing that. So the report that will be released tomorrow, what will it be based on? Who has been interviewed? And then you're looking at the truth. The truth now is the victims, talking to victims. You're looking at the villains, the morticians themselves. You're talking about the people making confessions, the history, investigations, records, complaints, all these things. Unfortunately, you can't do all this in 3 minutes and in 1 day. Mm. So for investigations in a case like this is you let the dust settle. A mortician will speak somewhere, trust me. You'll find a confession somewhere. The victims right now cannot talk because everybody is on this story and people are very scared. After a while, 1 or 2 will come out and begin to speak. you will get pictures maybe, you will get the whole truth come out. So we shouldn't give up. Right. We are definitely on this, and we are digging into this. We are not like the politicians where, you know, it's all because we want the pictures out, and this is not just to make a big headline or to sell the biggest story to trend, but it's a serious issue because you're talking about rape of mothers. It's absurd. You can't even explain how you can rape a mother who's just had a C-section. I mean, there are no words to describe this. Right. So it's more than a story, and the victims' voices have to be heard in this story. Unfortunately, more often than not, in the public discourse, people will actually lose track and focus of this and bring everything else inside.
Just in your pursuit, was the victim willing to speak now? Or you?
No, in my case, initially, because of that pressure, you know, she didn't expect that the story will blow up the way it did, because she was just speaking to the whistleblower and they were just having a conversation. And the whistleblower observed her taking pee in a basin and asked, why are you doing this? And she said, oh, here, this is what we do. Because we have had women who have been raped, we've had this, and the woman, the woman was shocked and wrote this whole article on Facebook. And people started calling from Standard newspaper, the Star newspaper, people were calling, I was calling. So as a mother in the hospital, obviously, you will be scared that this has drawn too much attention. You never expected it's going to blow up like this. Then you're talking about mothers who are not really, you know, who may not really afford medical care in another different hospital. So they are there to stay. They're afraid of being victimized by the morticians, perhaps, or being victimized by the management, perhaps. There are cartels that work within KNH. I was surprised this evening to hear that there are cartels even in the kitchen at KNH. You know, that there are people who get special meals, and there are chefs who are bribed by, you know, families that go to the hospital. I mean, it's a whole mess.
There's a lot to look into.
There's so many things to look into.
Right.
Yes.
For you, Dorothy, and as we conclude, I'm under pressure from Mark, my director. What would be the logical end for you? Would it be Koros resigning?
One, she should, because this is a major scandal, as he has just said, as Dennis has just said, raping somebody. Forget even C-section. A woman who has just given birth, you know, medically they are given at least 6 weeks before they can have any sexual engagement. But we have a bigger problem on our hands, and we have not talked about it, and it's not receiving the attention that it needs.
Which is?
Which is comprehensive sex education, which is cheapening sex so much that there's going to be more experimentation, and unless something is done to nip that program in the bud, you are going to see more rapes, not only in Kenyatta but countrywide, because the young people who may be there are being made to believe that, you know, it's play it happy, you know. It's like the thing to do. So you want to experiment with anything. You want to experiment even with the dog. Sorry to say so. So we also have to look at what the education sector is doing on the issue of sex. Are we just making it free for all, you know, even children who have no business doing sex? And what about culture? Yeah. You know, it's like we are throwing our culture away, you know, and just following blindly because it's being done in the West, you know, because this is a program that is being sold globally. It's not a Kenyan program. It's a global program, and we are just swallowing it hook, line, and sinker, you know. And then health. So there are all those angles that need to be examined.
All right. Dolphin?
I think Dorothy makes great points about sex education, but I'd like to differ a bit on the comprehensive sex education. I think there's value in doing it right. If we look at places where it's been properly implemented, there are actually less incidences of gender-based violence, including sexual violence. I think part of the problem is, for example, the DCI was asking people who've experienced this to come forward and report so that they can document this and do proper investigations. And one of the things that came out was that rape is hard to prove 72 hours after the incident. Right. Most of the women who are coming forward now are talking about years, things that happened years ago. So this, even if they do come forward, it's going to be hard for them to prove that this happened to them because the evidence is lost. I think in good comprehensive sexual education, then people get to learn, for example, what is rape. People should be taught in school because rapists don't only rape adults, they actually rape even children. So what is rape? How do you behave after rape? We have post-exposure prophylaxis for people who experience rape. Many people don't know that they can have access to this, and this can actually prevent them from getting HIV. Many people don't know that within 72 hours, if you're raped, if you don't report this, that there's a way that you can tamper with the evidence. So I think this is part of what the stories right now should include. What is rape? How do you behave? How do you behave after just experiencing rape?
Even continuously, not just
Yes, now. Yes. So I think there's a place for comprehensive sex education if done well, and I think there's evidence in places where it's been done well, where it actually helps with some of these challenges that we have right now. I've not examined the current curriculum, so I don't know what exactly would be the contentious issues, but I know in places where it's been done properly, actually people do grow up knowing like what are their rights around sexual, health, but also how to behave in such incidences, because unfortunately this is one of those oldest crimes that we can try reduce, but I'm not sure we're going to get rid of right now. So one of the ways that we can help future victims, hopefully we have less and less of them, is by giving them education so that they, even as they become traumatized with the events, they don't end up having, let's say, HIV or also tampering with the evidence so that they don't get justice. So I think there are many things that a good story right now should be able to address, and some of it is how do we go about, for example, training our young people to, to have a healthy relationship with sex, so that they don't, you're not a man and you see a girl out there and because they are wearing a short skirt, this is an excuse, and because they're in a dark alley, this is an excuse, and because you're alone, this is an excuse, and because you're in a crowd and you have power, this is an excuse. So how do we go about training young people to understand this? So I think there's value for good education, and the media should highlight this. And I think these are some of the things that the story should be about, not just now we have a demonstration, now we have a press conference, now we have someone reporting. I think this is an opportunity to incorporate many aspects of whatever is happening so that people learn from this. Maybe this would be part of the justice for the victims, that others don't go through what they went through.
And that inches into the issue, as you give your last comment, Moriah, is specialized teams. We have a health desk here at the Nation Media Group. Perhaps there's themes that they can be pursuing on that. This was something you brought up during the break, and as you conclude.
Yes, I think one of the biggest problems you're having at the moment is that we're having media houses that are going for all-rounded journalists. So it's a journalist who can be able to cover more than one thing. And that, to me, is a very big problem, because we had a time where we had specialized journalists within the media houses, within the newsrooms. And that person knew very well, this is something that I'm very passionate about. It's something that I really want to cover. It's something that I know once I start this particular story, I am not going to stop. But then right now you're finding that those people are being told, you can only do stories about health. If we send you to do, say, a political story, you cannot be able to do it. If we send you to do a business story, you cannot be able to do it. So they are seen as a liability. And right now we're seeing a process where most media houses are literally letting go of people because of that.
It's happening here.
Yeah, that is something that is very, very positive, and something that most media houses need to actually look into, because just like Dolphin was talking about tampering with evidence, one of the things that happens a lot in rape cases, because most of them happen, the people who actually perpetrate rape are people that you know. So the first thing that comes to mind is the shame. So what do? You very quickly go take a shower, because you need to clean yourself. You tell yourself that's the best thing to do at that particular moment, and then later, when now you're reporting the issue and the issue is being investigated, they cannot be able to get any evidence. They cannot be able to take any semen samples from you to be able to actually certify that rape actually did happen, and that person who did it ends up going scot-free. The people who can be able to do these are people who have a passion for it. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and I'm sorry, I know this is a very serious issue, but I was just looking at the way everyone here was talking about the morticians, and I was thinking about it. As a journalist, that would be my first source at the moment for this particular story. And my reason being, everyone is talking about the morticians. I do not think they're the only people who are doing it. So you might be able to actually get the real story if you talk to the morticians, because they might even end up doing their own investigation. So sometimes it's good to even
clear their name.
Exactly, because they will feel that yes, everyone is attacking us. So we need to come out and speak and say we are not the ones who are doing it. There are other people who are doing it. I spoke to somebody at KNH who was talking about there being residential houses within the KNH compound that belong to KNH staff. So we have young men who don't have jobs who live within those residential houses. There are people who visit those houses. So could they be part of the people who are perpetrating this particular crime? So let's not be very quick to particularly point out at the morticians. Let's look at it as a big problem that needs to be sorted. And as I mentioned earlier, for a member of staff to know that they are at risk working within the same environment, it means KNH themselves know about it. So again, this is where I'd agree. It's about time somebody took responsibility. And the main reason why this has even taken the ugly angle that it has taken is because, like Dolphin mentioned, yes, it is something that had come up before, but then the way KNH handled it, instead of coming out and refuting the claims and
on the defense.
Exactly, they actually came out and were proactive. They were like, okay, fine, this is happening. Can you tell us more about it? And then they were able to find out who exactly was doing it, and they were able to suspend that person. The only reason this issue is out in public domain, Mark, is because somebody was willing to talk about it. Let's have people speaking out. Yes, rape is a very shameful act. It is one thing that once it happens to you, psychologically you're affected, and there is no way you're going to like very quickly talk about it because you're traumatized. But let's have more people out there talking about it, because if this person had not spoken about it, then we would not have seen this issue come up. In fact, I was looking at some of the witness accounts on Twitter. There are so many people now who are willing to talk about it, and they're constantly talking about being threatened. The fear that they have, that they are still within KNH, and they are being told if they speak out, then they don't know what is going to happen to them. These people might go ahead and attack them. So let's look at all these things that are contributing to the victims not speaking out.
Well, many angles to pursue on this. Real quick, yes. Because you're a lady, I'll give you that opportunity.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, and maybe it's a question to Dennis. We have the Access to Information Act, which kind of gives us journalists and members of the public permission to go and ask how different public institutions are serving us. There's all this talk of CCTV footage by KNH. Has any of the journalists asked to have access to it, or do we only expect that this will be given to the DCI for investigation? Are we looking at the same to say, okay, we've also looked at this footage, and we've asked for the last 6 months of this footage, and we've seen nothing that looks suspicious, or we've looked at it and this is what we came up with. Has anyone asked for this, so that we're not just waiting for a report from one end? Because I remember during elections we had IEBC tallying, but we also had media houses tallying, so they would say, we did our own tallying, the IBC did their own tallying, and we concur. So is it possible then for us as media to say, can we see this footage that you say that you have? If you indeed have footage, showing this highlighted areas, do we have this footage? Can we look at it? And then can we come to a conclusion as media and say, we're able to, as part of the investigation, we're able to examine this and see, we did not see anything, or this is what we saw, so that when you report, you're just not reporting on hearsay based on what...
Dennis, you have an opportunity to answer that. It was her last say.
Because I'm aware of that, actually, we've done that, but the nature of how we operate in this country, we have what you call the spirit and the letter of the law.
Yes.
The unfortunate thing is, it's just a letter. There's no spirit in that law. Because
so if you went to access that, you wouldn't be...
Even
getting access to the premises itself.
Exactly. Even just being seen at KNH with a camera, living on a camera. There's a time I just went there just to say hi to someone, a friend of mine. Just being there, it raised attention. And what are you coming to cover here? It's because I've covered KNH before, and I'm just a suspect just going there. And so it's easy to say you can access that. And most times we ask for that information. We ask to view the CCTV footage, even when we know there are no cameras in certain corridors and in certain places, and they confidently say, we're going to review CCTV footage. Most times the cameras don't even work. So they will always say, we are looking into this, we'll get back to you. That's the word you always get. That to a journalist, it means you will never get it. So find it through other means, and that takes time to get a story like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to end it here. And I see Mariah wanting to raise a question, but the conversation continues.
It wasn't even a question, actually.
Real quick one.
A very, very quick one. In fact, I was going to talk about protection of sources, because I think this is something else that is also affecting us as journalists. Probably we are not being seen to protect our sources, and this could be one of the many reasons why they're not coming to us first.
All right. A lot of angles to pursue. There's a report coming out and actually being made public tomorrow. Let's see what it has. We won't just stop at giving verbatim what it says, but we have a lot of work in terms of interrogating this and many angles to this story. Mariah mentioned something about resourcing teams to be specialized in focusing on if it's health matters or investigative journalism. Well, the reality is that it's facing many media houses, even this particular media house, the very office that I work in. And there's a very dark cloud today because as the letter went out on the 17th of January, there is, of course, Transforming for a Stronger Future Nation Media Group announces group-wide reorganization. You can actually grab this, my director. And over the recent past, we embarked on a strategic journey of transforming the group into a modern 21st century digital content company. We have made, let me just zoom this out, you could see it properly. There you go. And if I could just read this, I don't know if you can still see it. We have made critical strides such as converging our newsroom, launched new innovative products, developed new revenue streams while ensuring we secure our current print and broadcast business. In this regard, the implementation of the strategy will continue to involve the reorganization of our operations across the group, and regrettably this will result in a reduction of our workforce. This letter really sounds good, but it doesn't feel good being part of this process. It's still ongoing here, and there are many colleagues of mine who have had to bid farewell. And I take this opportunity, as Dennis has rightfully put it, we are humans, and these are some of the realities that are facing us in this profession at this very day and moment. So I bid farewell to my colleagues who have actually had to be laid off today, and it's still ongoing. So these are the realities, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to discuss and demand of our profession that is facing our very profession and our colleagues in many families. My name is Mark Masai. I end on that point. Good night.